I'm happy to inform you that you are all on the panel now. We're not going to wait for the Q&A period. Anytime that you have a thought or a question or a comment, just wave your hand and a note card will magically appear in front of you, and they will come up to us, and we'll incorporate as many of them as we can. I was intimidated when I found out that I drew the assignment to moderate this panel. I'm a journalist, I have expertise. As a journalist, you have just enough expertise in many things to be dangerous, but not really enough. But I did realize that journalism and education are really in the same business, which is to make people smarter and more equipped for the challenges that we face. And in fact, then I realized that when our organization was founded, just a few blocks from here in San Francisco in 1976, the mandate was an educational one. It was to educate the public about the pressing issues of the day. And wow, not really much need to do that at the moment. So in that sense, I feel connected to the expertise that the rest of the panel has. But these are folks who have really spent a lifetime thinking about education in that much more holistic way as something that happens not just in the classroom, not just in pursuing a credential, but really constantly and everywhere. So that is what we'll talk about. Again, would love to have all of your participation. We also decided to keep this conversation very much in a storytelling mode. Two of us are journalists by trade, and two of us are incredible storytellers, and it is 3 in the afternoon, and we want to keep you alert and engaged, so there will be a lot of specific examples of the kinds of things that we want to talk about. Let me tell you a little bit about the panelists. To my left is Sandeep Aneja. He is founder and managing partner of Kaizenvest, which is an education-focused fund management firm headquartered in Singapore, and I learned the only education sector-focused fund manager with private equity and private debt funds in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Philippines, and now also in the US. So the geographic span alone is really fascinating, and some of the common challenges that they encounter. Sandeep also sits on the boards of a number of education companies, and of course has worked in Silicon Valley and is happy to be back in the Bay for this. Judy, yes?
Question already. Where'd the name come from? Kaizen?
Yeah, it came from engineering.
Thank you. Judy is the Senior Vice President of Public Relations, Communications, and Planning for American Student Assistance. That's a nonprofit, so she is in the business of, for purposes of this panel, of understanding the market and the ecosystem in which our two investors operate. She has spent a lifetime in educational publishing, worked at Pearson, which is of course a household name in the space, and has been involved in children's publishing as well. And at ASA, they really focus on helping students make great decisions about their future careers. I think they are the only ones that do this starting in middle school, which is quite fascinating. And finally, Matt Greenfield is the managing partner of Rethink Education. They also invest in education-related businesses. The list of companies that he's invested in is too long to list here. The list of boards he sits on is potentially even longer. But what I really loved about Matt is a sentence from his LinkedIn bio that reads, "I believe that education at every level should combine the playfulness and joy of preschool, the intense collaboration of a hackathon, and the deep self-guided exploration of a doctoral thesis." So sign me up for that. He's also founded a software company focused on special needs students. So that might also be something that we touch on. We thought we would focus the conversation today on 3 big disrupting factors in education, because where there is disruption, there is trauma and chaos, and there's also opportunity and the potential for change toward better outcomes and more equity. The first great disrupting force at the moment is the one that every panel in San Francisco must talk about. I don't make the rules, and that, of course, is generative AI. And so I wanted to start by asking each of you for your thoughts on the potential for generative AI to create better outcomes in education, and the risks of the opposite happening, with any specific examples that you've come across. And just based on the vigor of your nodding, I'm going to start with Judy.
Thank you. And guys, thank you so much for finding us. You get a gold star for that. When I think about AI, like everyone else, I'm like, okay, it's a tool, we'll figure out how to use it. But I had an experience recently where I actually saw high school kids use AI to create a business case and a business plan and present a solution to an employer, and these kids weren't even 16 years old. I was floored. In comparison, a group that came after them that were in college, I was not floored. So I think there is the power for the young folks who are growing up with it, right? It's like, it's just like saying to us, hey, do you remember when you first got your TV and everyone sat around the TV? They know how to use these tools, and they are using these tools, and they're not cheating. They're using them to create something really amazing.
Thank you, Judy. That's a great start. Sandeep, you want to go next?
Yeah. So I think we've had AI in our midst for a while, for years now. And generative AI has made AI more, I suppose, commonplace. And therefore, we are seeing generative AI as the equivalence of AI. So taking a step back in the AI space, which is broader than generative AI, what's very exciting is still possible out there is the level of personalization that AI can bring and theoretically create a class of one for every student. And we are chasing that utopian dream for a long time with various innovations that have occurred over the years, especially in our Khan Academies, Khanmigo, and a few other products that we may have all heard of, which is brilliant. In the Asia and Africa context, which is most relevant to my experience in the recent past, it makes a lot of difference to realize that generative AI is either going to bridge a lot of gaps or further the digital divide. That's one concept we have to keep in mind. On the other hand, the amount of data we are getting and we're realizing, is enabling a lot of companies in Asia to focus on just data for the first time. It was all about a lot of hard work from teachers and learners working together to create solutions for themselves, but AI enables, for the first time, administrators to look into what data they should capture from students very early years all the way to alumni and leverage that to come up with learning tracks, personalization, lowering the cost of learning, and enabling teachers to take away some of the admin tasks. So that's starting to occur, and very bullish about the basic stuff getting automated so the teacher-mentor human interaction can be further strengthened. And I see that as the biggest value of AI, strengthening human interactions further.
That's a hopeful take.
So, to build on something Sandeep said, I am worried that we're going to end up with a two-tiered system where the less affluent get taught by machines and the more affluent continue to get taught by humans. This moment reminds me a lot of 2012 when my first fund launched, which was also the year of the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course. And you may remember that Sebastian Thrun of Stanford University and Google said that there would be only 10 universities left in the world. The 10 most impressive universities would dominate the creation of content by the year 2020. I think there was some confusion about the difference between the university experience and courseware. And it also wasn't necessarily very good courseware. It was produced by people who didn't understand a lot about teaching. But there are many positive things that one can do with generative AI. I think it's going to be a lot more powerful once it's combined with other types of AI. So generative AI gives you a kind of bland and homogenized answer for the most part. Have any of you ever read about adaptive evolutionary algorithms, which mutate in each generation and try crazy experiments? They seem wildly creative. They're especially good at engineering their way around rules. I mean, one really spooky example that I remember was that they were using adaptive evolutionary algorithms to guide the creation of a radio. And the algorithms figured out how to build a working radio missing several of the usual components by using the magnetic fields of other instruments in the lab. Right? So that is, very different than what you get with generative AI most of the time. But what generative AI, I think, is great at is curation. So, selecting materials. Back in 2014, and I'll try to keep this brief, so don't worry.
I warned them all.
Yeah, I wrote an essay about my method as a college professor, which was to start on the first day of class and go around the room and ask everyone what they were passionately interested in. And sometimes it would take a little bit of probing to figure out what that really was. And I talked about one particular guy who was just radiating hostility when he came into the class. He hated school. And he was interested in cars. And so when I had gone all the way around the room, I came back to him and said, "Could you tell the class about the craziest thing you ever did in your car?" And he was a little startled at first, but then started telling a story that he had told many times before. And the class was riveted, and the acts narrated in this story were extremely dangerous. Do not try them at home. And I said when he had finished, "Okay, you've got an A for this assignment. You just have to write up what you just told me. The rest of you, try to think of a similarly compelling story about the thing you were passionate about when you did something a little edgy." And it changed his whole relationship to school, right? The next assignment was an explanation of something, and I again used him as my guinea pig in the classroom. So tell me how you modified your car. But remember, I'm a car ignoramus. I don't understand what a spoiler is. Could you explain? And putting him in the position of the expert. And next thing you know, he was writing a really interesting research paper on the history of the automobile. It turns out to be a surprisingly complex and ambiguous thing when the automobile was invented. And I think it is our mission, all of us, to ensure that school is less of a meat grinder for every child, and the same to some extent with college and workforce training, and that it centers on their needs. And that means creating a customized version of every class for every student by finding materials and questions that center on the material of the course, that aren't a separate course, but that connect with the passions of that student and the aspirations and the values, and possibly also the fears.
Thank you. Maybe picking up on that story that you just told, and the fact that we are in San Francisco where there is a huge amount of money flowing into AI development at the moment, I'm wondering what kinds of, whether you think that the investment in AI in the education space at the moment is generating the right incentives. And Sandeep, I thought I'd pick up on something that you said during the prep, which is that a lot of ed tech investment is driven by standardized testing.
Yeah. I think it is easy to imagine that every investor seeks a measurable outcome. And when you look at another industry such as retail, the investor's mindset, who's a generalist investor, is really about maximizing sales per customer, lowering the cost of acquisition of the customer, and making sure that the customer comes back happy with a huge NPS score by the service provider. When you look at education or ed tech from that same investor's perspective, it becomes all about driving NPS, which is customer service. And customer service is not necessarily an indicator of learning outcomes. It's a great method of saying, I can go back into the 3 T's of educators: the tutor, the teacher, the technologist. The tutor will be brilliant at customer service. They'll get great NPS scores because they're good at managing parents. A teacher is terrible at managing parents, generally, exceptions, of course, aside. A teacher will be brilliant at managing the pedagogical aspects and may not be liked but can inspire some students, and he or she may not be thrilled at customer service, thrilled by customer service. The technologist, on the other hand, is a person that's driven within the ed tech part of it, generally in love with the algorithm. They think they can solve the problem with any algorithm. So when you look at a company founded by these 3 distinct types of people in education, you got to look at what metrics they're measuring for their own success. And the metrics are different almost every time. The teacher tries to measure and promote in the presentation the outcomes. A tutor presents retention. A technologist will present product innovation. And you got to say, okay, the 3 of you come together, you'll build a great company, but they rarely do. But the investors, on the other hand, look at AI as a tool for measuring the aspects of education which they measure in other topics, unless you come into education investing from a perspective of education first. And that then requires that you measure outcomes which are driven based on learning improvement or social solution improvement. And how do you come in a setting where technology is something brand new, a mobile device is the only tool you got? How do you bring measurement of outcomes? How do you measure retention? How do you do it over a longitudinal, long period of time? And how do you convert that into a measurement of their life improvement? That's AI's role. That was very hard to measure. The inputs are very difficult to figure out. The outputs are difficult to measure. But through AI, which is out there measuring unspecific data in an unstructured manner, finding correlations, finding causality, that is much more amazing today. And where you can say, okay, students of this background, this grade, learning this topic visually versus non-visually for so much time can have this much improvement in something that's measurable. I love that. So we can, for the first time, get into a situation where, with AI, we can measure things which are harder to measure at scale over time. Of course, there are other issues at play as well, but that's pretty much what I'll start with. Thanks.
It's great. We're not going to have everyone answer every question because we want it. And for those of you who joined us in the last 10 minutes or so, anytime you have a thought or a question, just wave and a note-taking tool will appear, and you'll be able to send that up to us on the panel.
But it's not an AI note-taking tool, just saying.
You will not be suddenly joined by an AI note-taker. So if either of you would love to jump in on what Sandeep just said, let's hear it. And then I have another question for all of you.
I think that the education system for a long time has been pursuing the wrong learning outcomes. And so the thing that excites me the most about this moment is the opportunity to use AI as an excuse, a pretext for ripping everything down to the studs and rebuilding it in a way that is centered on curiosity, collaboration, joy. Right now, the experience of school and college is kind of like an obstacle course, and the less affluent and the more vulnerable you are in other ways, the likelier you are to run into an obstacle that throws you permanently out of contention for a life of prosperity and purpose.
Let's move on to the other 2 big disrupting forces that we wanted to talk about. But before we do that, I actually wanted to change it up a little bit just to stick with our storytelling mission and ask each of you since we've gotten a little bit of a sense of how each of you think about the field, I wanted to ask each of you, tell us about one really inspiring company or program that you've been involved with in recent years. Let's change it up and go left to right, so starting with Matt.
Okay, God, so many choices. One of my most exciting companies is called Ignite Reading, and it's an expensive service, $2,500 per child. It is remote literacy tutoring, 5 days a week, 15 minutes per day. And when you walk into a room where the tutoring is occurring, the first thing you notice is that everyone is on task. There is no horsing around. Nobody is really disengaged in a one-on-one conversation. In fact, these kids are almost desperate for the attention of a caring adult for one-on-one conversation. And there is abundant evidence that suggests that even without teaching someone to read, that contact with a caring adult who believes in you and believes you can excel is hugely impactful. The second thing that you realize is that even at a high-performing charter school, the kids who are in that room are probably not going to learn to read without differentiated instruction, systematically going from cluster of letters to cluster of letters and making sure they have mastered each one. And these kids sense that they are being thrown out with the trash, right? They already know that. And so it is so life-changing for them to realize that they can learn if someone bothers to teach them, and it changes their behavior and their whole relationship to school.
And I have to follow that. I think probably most recently I was in Kansas City at a conference. The conference was around intentional pathways for high school students, and I am a huge proponent of the need to transform our high schools from what they are today to a blended work and learn experience. And one of the things that I experienced was with the CAPS network. This is one of our grantees, full disclosure. But what they have done is they've created two models to transform high schools around the country, but mostly in a couple of states and hopefully with some funding, some more states. The first model that they've created is they've partnered with all of the high schools in Kansas City Public Schools to send their juniors and seniors to a facility, a gorgeous state-of-the-art facility, for 3 hours a day, every week. And what they do is they immerse them in careers, in career readiness learning and in career experiential learning. What does that really mean? So you walk into this amazing place and you see some kids that are wearing white coats. What are they, doctors? I don't know. You walk into the medical lab and they have these dummies laying there, and the kids are all around them trying to diagnose what this dummy has. And the dummy sits up and goes, "Ow!" Well, I ran out the room right after that. That was too much Halloween for me, but they're immersing themselves in things like that. The other is a burn facility, and so they create these mock burns, and the adults sit there going, oh, and the kids have to diagnose, 1st degree, 2nd degree, 3rd degree burn, okay, and now what is the medical treatment? And the reason this is so powerful, and this happens in, I think they have engineering, food science, and a bunch of other categories. I think there's 12 different categories. The employers, the local employers, are the ones that are coming in every single day and teaching the kids the skills that they need to succeed. The other model that they do really quickly is that in some cases, the kids can't leave the school district, so that the CAPS network creates a relationship with the employers to actually go into the schools on a periodic basis and provide the same sort of experiential learning, and the kid doesn't have to leave the classroom. CAPS network does it beautifully. There's others like Big Picture Learning, and the whole concept is to take the kid out of the classroom and put them in a learning experience, a real-world learning experience. And they may decide, like when I saw these burns, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to be a doctor. Ugh. Or I do want to be a veterinarian because look, there's all these animals that I've helped. And they actually told a story about piglets. And I can't tell the end of the story because I may cry, but they were learning food production. And they had the piglets there on a little mock farm. And the kids were learning to castrate the piglets, to treat the piglets with whatever they treat them, and then, do I need to say it? Mm-hmm. Turn them into food. But these kids were learning what it means to be in that profession, hands-on, in high school, so that when they graduate, they know exactly what post-secondary education they need to pursue their careers. And to me, that was magic.
And to not butcher pigs. Yeah.
Ew.
Yeah. I mean, I love that example of experiential learning. I think what big picture a charter network does particularly well is to not only immerse people in experiential learning, but to connect it to some sort of attempt to change the world for the better. So it's not just learning for the sake of one's own career even. It's very empowering to kids to think that they can actually change their communities even when they're in high school.
This sense of agency around changing the world around you is pretty brilliant, because the example I'm about to go into will definitely, if you ever visit that college, it's quite far away, I promise you, you will walk away a changed human being, unless you're already there, which will be amazing. The examples of a company called FinMy Education, I invested in it, we invested in it 2019. I chased the company from 2016 to 19 for 3 years to take our money. They interviewed us, they interviewed my investors, they interviewed me numerous times. We had to present to the whole board, and then they said, okay, now you can apply to invest. Because they wanted to make sure that there was perfect alignment between us, who claim to be impact investors, them, who are very mission-driven, and their student body, which is super dependent on that mission. So they didn't want to dilute the alignment. And now, 5 years hence, it is my favorite investment. My previous favorite investment was in San Francisco, 2 blocks from here, a company called Lasso Logic that did so well. That guy, Steve Goodman, CEO, was amazing. It took me 13 years to find my next favorite one. So this particular one is favorite because of the following things. Number one, they are totally mission-driven. From the top founder, board, the teachers, the way they acquire teachers, the way they train them, the way they acquire colleges, their buy and build model, and the way they turn colleges around, what they emphasize. If there is a basketball court, Philippines love is basketball, they rip it apart, replace with boring classes, because we need that. You cannot play with people's careers there. They're going to college for the first time, and they come in with a lot of different mentality. Let me give you an example. Every year now we admit 40,000 students across the 10 colleges. Only 1%, 400 students, that's 1%. Yeah, 10% is 4,000, 1% is 400, right? 1% are college ready. They are learning on average at 6th or 7th grade. The first year, guess what we spend the time on in teaching? We teach them self-confidence. Pretty much, first 6 months. We teach them agency, that you can change the world. We teach them purpose. The next 6 months, they absorb, and then they sell you the college. When you go to college and talk to them about why it is great, they'll tell you how it transformed their lives, where they come from. And during COVID, which is when we were tested a lot, it's a very competitive market because we are competing with free. It's the cheapest private college chain in the country. And our competition is free. We charge $500 a year tuition, and yet we make 35% EBITDA margin profits. Why? Because the pedagogy innovation is incredible, the technology innovation is incredible, and they do it the right way. During COVID, our profits went down to 17% because we used that extra 17 profit and shipped mobile phones to every student. We partnered with the carriers and said, we will use Facebook Live, which is free on the carrier waves, but up to a certain extent, make it totally free for all learners for the amount of time. They agreed to that. We drop shipped books to the people who had gone back to the islands. That cost was carried by the company. We didn't collect fees for 6 months. Every other competitor collected fees. Post-COVID, the bump up we got in admissions was incredible. Nobody can catch up with us anymore. So this company has embodied what it takes to build a purposeful entity from the ground up, and they do a good job in ensuring that they maintain consistency with the type of investor they allow in. So it's been a great learning process for us. Anyway.
Great stories. So I told you these are all incredible storytellers, and I told you that you are all on the panel now, and this was confirmed for me by a couple of questions that you sent up. You are all the moderator now. I'm done. So we'll do this as a lightning round. I will share these questions and just ask you for a super quick question to each. The first one, sticking with the Philippines, is from somebody who does work in the Philippines, and they ask, many parents and students have a pragmatic approach to education. The cost of the education is offset by the opportunity in the form of a job at the end. So in the Philippines, the goal for many students is a job overseas or a job at a call center. Both of these are more difficult. AI is disrupting call centers and visas are harder to get. So this person asks, what should we tell the parents?
Yeah, so
Lightning round.
The goal is not that. The goal is to be with the family. It's an unfortunate situation that people have to aspire to go abroad or to get a job in a call center. If you really ask the people what they really want, they want to be close to home. So the fact that Philippines is unable to create industries that require and build employment locally is the biggest challenge, and that's the problem. And biggest issue underlying that, there are two underlying social issues. One is a term called nosebleed in Philippines. You know nosebleed? What that means is whenever somebody tries to get ahead and learn a lot, other parents, other people around you will say, oh, I don't get it, I got nosebleed. You celebrate lack of knowledge. That's the hardest culture element we fight at FINMA. We need to celebrate acquiring knowledge, not that, oh, I don't know this, I have nosebleed now. I cannot celebrate that. It sounds cute, doesn't last. Second issue is most students who pick a career based on parental pressure or peer pressure, not because of what they really aspire, because communication is very top-down, very hierarchical. So we're working on those two in enabling families to better understand the role of college.
Thank you. Let me just jump to the next one in the lightning round. Questioner asks about the social emotional learning space and what you see as critical unmet needs that you would want to see more organizations delivering solutions for. I feel like this has Judy all over
I see you're looking at me. The pandemic wasn't the only thing that created an issue for our young people. Many young people, even before the pandemic, if they were lucky enough, they got through high school. If they were lucky enough, they got into college. But what we were finding out was many kids had no idea why they were in college. And that created a sense of stress for them. Or they couldn't complete it in 4 years, or they had to stop out for financial reasons, any reasons, or they graduated and still couldn't find a job that needed their degree. So what we have been finding is that if you start earlier in middle school and you focus young people on learning about themselves to create self-identity and what they're passionate about, then you can, in high school, start to create an awareness of what the world needs and what the world will pay for. And if you've heard of this principle called Ikigai, it's a Japanese principle of harmony. That's exactly what needs to happen, so that the time kids graduate from high school, they understand who they are, they know what they love to do, they know what the world wants, they know what they can get paid for, and they can select post-secondary education that's right for them to try to alleviate all of that stress that we've seen in the past.
So the theme of the conference is system change, which is also the theme of my panel tomorrow. And I guess we've all been talking about forms of system change in different ways. What I think a lot of people don't understand about SEL is that it's not just a curriculum that you teach the students. It's an attempt to transform the habits and values of everyone in the community. The people who work in the school as well as the students and the people in the community around the school, which is why it really works in a way that, say, bullying prevention programs do not work.
Here, here.
I'm going to toss this question at you because it fits with this SEL conversation a bit, and it's provocative. How many children have been involved in the design of any ed tech that you may have been involved with?
Oh, can I please take that? I'm dying to take that. So ASA provides free digital experiences for kids in middle school and high school, and there's about 15 million of them on our platforms. Each of those platforms was built with kids, hundreds of kids, thousands of kids, telling us the colors they like, telling us what they want to call the thing, telling us what the experiences want. So we are a firm supporter of co-creation with the demographic that you're trying to affect.
So Monika mentioned the company that I co-founded, Rethink First, which serves over 3 million students today and has over 100 million in revenues. And I have this indelible memory of the early days of the company with a bunch of children on the autism spectrum running around the office, and one of them wrestling with the CEO. And they were in there to be filmed going through lessons of different kinds, but they were also really part of the texture of life at the company.
Sandeep, I think this one is perfect for you, but anybody feel free. What are the most important metrics in career education, especially when held against employment percentage and or starting salary, income, wage?
Wow. I'll need your help, Judy, with this one. This you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Could you say it again, though? As soon as you said Sandeep, I wasn't listening.
And just so you know, we're already, thanks to all of your great questions, well into the second great disrupting force that we wanted to talk about, which is the disruption of traditional degree education and things like just-in-time education, credentials of a great variety. So this question asked, what do you think are the most important metrics in career education, especially when held against employment percentage and starting salary or wage?
Yeah, so I think it depends on where you are in the student journey. You can't expect a middle schooler to be judged on outcomes on workforce development. That's just too far away. I think as a society, what we have done is we've asked kids to show us their value when they're in middle school or high school on standardized testing. I'm going to be brave here and say I think that should go out the window. Because I think what it does is it really does drive a gap. If you live in a certain zip code and you get certain information, you're going to do better on those tests. And I remember working for a very large textbook company, won't name them, you already named them. And I remember in the assessment division getting a complaint about a question about pineapples and skiing. And I thought, well, everyone knows what a pineapple is. Turns out that's not true. And the question was about pineapples, and the kids who were in these underserved communities are like, I don't know how to answer this question. I don't know what a pineapple is. Same thing with skiing. If you're skiing, what's the velocity of? And people said, skiing? I don't even, what is skiing? So I think we have to change that, and that is the measurement part of outcomes. For me, if we changed the way that we teach middle schoolers and high schoolers, the outcome would be happy, confident kids who are graduating from high school, knowing what they love to do and knowing where to go next. I think it's pure and simple.
I'd love to add to that. Sorry, Matt, go
I
ahead.
think the whole panel is going to answer this one.
I mean, it's a great question.
Yeah, two quick intangibles that come to mind after Judy made me think. Number one is, what did I want from my first job? First job is in the context. Number one, I wanted to learn. So very intangible, super important. Am I going to learn in this job, or is this just a way to get my first salary, which is important too. But I think in the long term, learning is important. Second, am I going to get mentored? And am I going to get challenged by the right person? Because just like Matt said, one teacher can change through one incident and interaction a student's life positively. A terrible boss can ruin your career immediately. So you've got to really be sure that you need to work with the right person who empowers you into a mode that you can be the best version of yourself. So more than just salary, I think, in the very near term, it's super important whom you work with and what you learn from it.
And that's after you're a happy, peppy person when you graduate high school, right?
Yeah, totally right.
Yeah. So there are some fairly simple metrics. What are the demographics that get admitted to the program? How many people complete it? What salary do they get? How long does it take to get them a job? How many of them get jobs at all? Where are they 5 years after they've completed, and so on. But then there's a set of more intangible questions, like how does this job fit with the values and aspirations and fears of the learner? You can't just treat them as machine parts moving down an assembly line, because they're not going to thrive in their career if it is deeply inimical to them. And I'll make this, I'll draw this to a swift close. There was a company that didn't unfortunately get off the ground that was trying to outplace people who were being laid off by large companies. And I remember that their evaluation process contained the question, do you like to work in an office or would you rather work outdoors? And it's kind of shocking how the school system as a whole never asks that question, right? And ASA is a phenomenal institution in a lot of ways. One of them is they are trying to create forms of advice for people as they make these critical decisions about their lives. Nobody gets any good advice in this country, especially, at any stage in their careers.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about outcomes, it's outcomes about personally what do I want when I graduate college or whatever, but it's also outcomes, what can I expect from the communities that surround me? Can I expect employers to embrace what I'm doing? Can I expect my parents to embrace what I'm doing? So there's educational outcomes, and then there's my personal outcomes about where I want to sit in society.
Thank you. We could spend the entire panel just on this question. It is such a good one. All of these have been terrific. So again, feel free to wave, and one of these notes will appear, and you can share your question with us. This next question is very much of this moment. This election cycle has illuminated ever more how half our country is so woefully lacking in education and or credible critical thinking skills. Are there conversations to raise the intelligence of this part of our population? Me. Can I have used moderator's
You could take
privilege
that.
for one
Why don't
moment?
you take that, Monica?
Yes, read Mother Jones.
Thank you. Well, my colleague Terry, who is right there, would have my head if I didn't mention that we do have some magazines on that table, and also a QR code that you can scan for some of our organization's coverage of education. But I say that because one of the ways in which I think journalism with its educational purpose has changed is in successful journalism, and mission-driven journalism really needs to think about how are you going to come to people where they are and with what they want to engage with. So it's no longer sufficient to say, here's a story that we have written that you can come and find to get informed on this issue. You have to think about, would you maybe like to see this in the form of a TikTok video? Would you like to see this in the form of a podcast? And so I love this question, but I want to posit that people are already intelligent. They're not being served material that they can engage with to become active citizens, certainly not by many in the media. And this is something that at our organization we have worked on a lot, but I suspect also in the education space. So I already see nodding from the panel.
Yeah, so listen, yes, there's plenty of intelligent people, but there's plenty that are not, or that can get led easily by misinformation. So at ASA...
That has very little to do with intelligence, unfortunately.
At ASA, we are big proponents of producing research that helps the field make decisions and move forward, and a lot of our policy work has been around work-based learning and post-secondary educations, and our policy team and the teams of our colleagues at Jobs for the Future have been asked to the White House on many occasions to present the findings of the papers, and we're so pleased to be able to say influence legislation.
I don't think, Monika, there's a correlation between intelligence and being easily biased. I have not seen that. I've seen some very intelligent people, and I come with a bias, I recognize that. But I'll give you an example, which is Stanford Business School. We all learned at business schools, whoever went there, an experiment called the Zimbardo experiment. What's turned up now? It was rigged. Yeah, the prisoner experiment, it was rigged. The guards were given sound bites in their ears to behave a certain way, to their motivations and their behavior were, and we all learned it and believed that we started believing in role theory, that role will determine your behavior. I think there is intentionality of what we read and hear is very hard to discern by the most intelligent people today. So biases make you read things differently. So how do we get rid of our own biases? If we can teach people that you as an individual are biased, just read yourself better, maybe we get ahead a little bit further. Super hard, sorry.
Yeah, I have a draft editorial on this topic. The fundamental question, there are lots of other skills, but the fundamental question is, how do you bring people who are filled with hate and fear to a place of empathy? And that ought to be one of the primary jobs of education at every level and of HR within employers.
Thank you. You are a very active audience, and 3 of you have asked questions that I'm going to try to summarize because you have pointed to a gap in our conversation so far. We've all talked about, students middle school through college and, people who are in the workforce, but there are a number of people here who are interested in early childhood education. And the questions are going to, are there bright spots in the sector? And what are your thoughts on family involvement in schoolwork among the younger students? And then there's one more that I'll share with you in a second.
So my firm does not like to serve the extremely affluent. And unfortunately, in this country, at least, childcare is unaffordable for most people. So it seems like an intractable problem. We have 2 companies that are growing and have revenue in the tens of millions right now. And one taps into employer subsidies, and the other one takes people who are going to have to drop out of the workforce to care for their own kids and empowers them to open up childcare operations in their homes, which is an amazing transformational thing because they can stay in the workforce, they can make a lot more money than they could working for a childcare center. It's more ecologically efficient because there aren't 2 places, a home and a workplace, there's just the home. It creates childcare supply in childcare deserts, and by the way, a lot of childcare businesses have died off since the onset of the pandemic. And they also have built some infrastructure that they sell to states for doing things like discovering open slots in childcare operations. Even if you can afford it, it can be an arduous and painful task to find an open slot in a place that you like and can afford.
Matt, I think childcare is probably one of the biggest issues in our country today, but I think there's one that's more pressing, and that's hunger. This has nothing to do really with what we're talking about. It's just a personal pet project or a passion. Our kids can't learn if they're hungry, if they don't have a good breakfast, if they don't have something for lunch. So I think we have to solve that issue along with childcare.
Well, it's not just hunger either. There are so many needs. I was talking to the principal of a high school in Newark, and he said he was looking into the causes of truancy, and he discovered that a number of students were ashamed to come to school because their parents would not set aside money to do laundry, and they didn't want to be teased for being stinky. And so he had to, so he set up washers and dryers in the basements, but schools alone cannot make up for the complete failure of the rest of our government and society to ensure that every child has basic needs met.
Although we ask them to.
Yeah.
This actually sets up this next question perfectly. The person asks, that early child development, perinatal experiences and early life experiences obviously have an incredible influence on learning outcomes later. So are there investments that can attack this particular problem?
So one thing that we're doing, Judy, and this is an experiment, we borrowed the term child lens from UNICEF, and we partnered with a large international NGO in Africa, and we've just launched a blended finance product to invest in bottom of the pyramid child lens-oriented entities, which is a combination of exactly what Judy and Matt are talking about. What are the 3 or 4 things that we can actually influence through investments that influence the ability of a child's ability to learn? And so we said we got to solve for shelter, nutrition, that is, and health, and climate resilience. So how do we solve for these 4 in such a way that there's a desire and ability on the family and the child to set out time and resources towards learning? So we can, it happens a lot. Midday nutrition, midday meal programs are well designed, well known, where the children go to preschool or school and they need to learn 3 hours before they're given their meal, because then they stay. That's well known. It's a done deal. It's happened many times. So how we are taking some of those lessons and implementing in 6 countries right now. It's a blended finance product. What that means is it's super affordable for the borrower, and we put in a sort of an innovation around that, which is a rewards innovation. If the entities which develop their own metrics, if they meet those metrics, they get an even reduced interest rate to pay. So, but post fact, you've got to earn it, and that really is better human behavior management. So that's something we're working on.
Is anyone doing that in the U.S.?
Just sticking with that theme for a minute, there was a question about how many school systems around the world, and the questioner specifically mentions across the African continent, are producing kids who don't learn. And I think what you're talking about is investing in helping them be learning ready. What other opportunities are to create situations where kids can learn?
You know, kids are born hungry, ferociously hungry to learn, and school kind of beats it out of them. So I would say, you know, not punishing them and channeling their energies in unproductive directions. If I can, I'll try to tell this anecdote briefly. Hawaiian Creole English was invented by children. They came from households that spoke lots of different languages at home, and they were just playing together. And they took the pidgin language, which people used to communicate, which was an English language-based pidgin, which did not have a full grammar, and they gave it a grammar. And they did it very quickly, basically in the 1890s. And there's, you know, it's difficult to reconstruct, but there is some documentary evidence. So if those children can collaborate and play and create a language, how is it that we cannot teach, for example, standard written English in 13 years of schooling? Or how is it that we focus so little on their ability to create beyond what adults would imagine possible?
Is that why we have charter schools, right? That are trying to solve that problem, that are trying not to, they have to do, obviously, the core subjects.
Well, the first generation of charter schools did a good job of making sure that students could read, write, and do basic arithmetic, but the no excuses model is extremely rigid and does not prepare students for success in college. So we're still working on that one in the charter sector.
See how quickly this is moving? We're already, mere minutes from the top of the hour when we have to wrap this up. So I'll try to get to 2 more questions. And if any of you can write really fast, we might be able to squeeze in one more. This questioner would like to know about effective solutions in the teacher training and retention pipeline.
Don't spit on them, call them groomers. Don't underpay them dramatically. let them teach. Like, don't make them teach things that don't make sense to them. Our math curriculum is kind of a death march through hundreds of irrelevant things, which results in people not actually learning the concepts that matter and not learning the playful and exploratory work of mathematics, what it's actually like to do mathematics, be a mathematician.
I wonder if our universities, our colleges and universities aren't failing teachers because...
Teachers' college is so boring, so many of them.
Exactly. So can you imagine if you were so excited in college to be a teacher, right, that you were taught, as opposed to teaching how to teach, I don't know, this horrible math curriculum, you were taught how to teach creativity, or in the case that I'm trying to push, career readiness. How do you teach about careers? Can you imagine if we equipped our teachers with that while they were studying?
So I was talking to Wendy Kopp last week, teacher role. We were talking about this same issue. So my belief is, after spending 14 years investing in education, is that teacher training is not a solution. Teacher training is a band-aid fixing the issue that faces at a very depth of it, which is the quality that comes into teaching now, and that quality that aspires to be teachers. It's generally not as good as it used to be. So we need to improve the quality of the raw material, not just invest money in training. Of course, invest in training. How can we make teaching as glamorous as being an AI engineer? I don't know. I would love to do that.
And can we pay teachers as the same money that we pay an AI engineer, please?
Again, another bit of research there that I believe, and I'll again disagree, that I don't think we need to pay teachers the same as AI engineers. I think we need to give them a career path. And I can, in my own, the way we hire on people in our team, I pay them less than market, and they do better than more than market job. How? Because we give them such a deep sense of mission. And we know they're changing lives. We know that we are not out there to produce the biggest IRR, but we'll change the most lives in 20 years time frame. And yeah, you'll earn less money, but you'll be super thrilled. So I think there is an answer there which we are struggling with, but we'll see.
Well, I come from a long, I love Sandeep, so I'm going to completely disagree with him. I come from a long line of educators that are struggling to feed their families because they're making less than a babysitter. And I think that's a problem. Maybe just in the US, but I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I have a surprising number of companies that are able to pay educators a lot more than market rate and get better results. I mean, partly a question of the talent, partly a question of the work that they put into it when they are inspired. Partly also just a question of the structure of the business and relying more on children working with each other.
Thank you. Now we can, jump into the second part of the panel where the panel fights. But we only have 3 minutes, and I'm going to summarize the last two questions, which kind of take us all the way back to the three big disruptive forces that we started out with. One was AI, one was the move away from traditional degrees and credentials, and one was politics and policy. And these questions, I would say, come from two different places. One is about what early indicators there might be to show us how schools and learning is changing because of AI, both inside and outside the classroom. The other takes a maybe slightly darker tack and says, we have so many dysfunctional systems that graduate kids who have not learned. How can investment produce systems change? So I think both of these really go to the big themes that we began with, and I'm hoping that each of you can take a swing at them in the best way you can in the last 2 minutes.
Eek. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, you remember my car guy. That is the goal here, right? He's intrinsically interested in it. And by the way, kids and college students are extremely interested in adult work. So that should be a much more central topic at school. The curriculum should center on it. I mean, from the moment they're 3 years old, they're playing dress up and pretending to do adult jobs. They're curious. You need to bring more adult experts in there. And again, I think AI is kind of a pretext for that, right? If there is an assignment that AI can just do for the student because the student finds it boring and not worthwhile, don't assign them that.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that a bit differently. There are 1 million different credentials out there by 60,000 providers. Those include 2- and 4-year schools in the U.S. If we can't, as adults, navigate that, how do we expect a high school kid to navigate that? And I think here's where AI can help. We're trying to create a solution for these young folks that they can find, evaluate, fund, and access non-degree credentials or just-in-time learning that's right for them. And I think AI is a game changer in helping us actually curate lists of high-quality credentials.
I think the panelists, Matt and Judy, have covered a lot, so I'll focus on one niche aspect of what we can achieve with AI and technology better used. We can individualize a person's agency, a learner's agency, in such a way that each person is going through a flipped classroom experience, which is I can prepare a little bit in advance, and through AI, I can interact with the teacher, which is an AI teacher, much faster, in a personalized manner. My answers are personalized to me. It's scalable because my human teachers are not scalable because of cost, obviously, but AI teachers are scalable. They are bots. I would love to create that experience for self-agency-driven learning. On the teaching part, Judy, the thing that I fully agree with is what you said.
Should I step away in case he
No,
starts swinging?
So I fully agree that we've got to pay teachers well, and we should. But above a certain point, we are lacking the drive from the teachers to say, at this point, I want to be the best teacher today.
Purpose.
If we can build that purpose, that'll be amazing.
Yeah.
What year do you think you would entrust your own kids to an AI tutor when you had the chance to send them to a human tutor instead?
So, the first AI tutor that I used for our elder boy who had learning stuff to deal with was when he was in grade 5, and he was learning from IXL, which was claiming some bit of AI, and we compared it with another product for him called Education Initiatives, which was also an education AI product, much more AI-driven than IXL, although IXL was more popular. And we compared his learning between the two. He would, in a class, Matt, key stage grade 5 exam, which is external exam in British curriculum, in class he would score B's and C's in every subject. In his key stage external examination, he scored A in all subjects. Why? He took out the teacher bias in classroom because he was so inattentive. He would look at teachers like this because he had issues to deal with. And today he's a different human being because we taught him that the way you interact with people, people think you're checked out, but you're really listening by not looking at them. You don't follow the behavior of looking and listening. In fact, most people don't do well by looking and listening at the same time. So we had to teach him that you are strong. So anyway, we had to work through AI to help him understand himself better.
Yeah, there's a great analogy in a book that I love. Imagine that all the students in the class have scooters except for one. It was a helicopter. And the teacher says, okay, everyone move forward 10 feet. And the helicopter goes 200 feet into the air and 300 feet back, right? That student is not meeting the demands of the class, but the helicopter is ultimately, once one learns to control it, a more valuable tool, rarer tool.